ago, the President of the Republic of Uganda assented and passed into law the anti-homosexuality law, which is or goes ahead to criminalize same-sex and same-sex activities. Now, that said, when that particular law was assented to by the president, a few weeks down the road, we go ahead and see the World Bank responding to Uganda and telling us that the law is against the values of the World Bank, which is against discrimination on race, gender, among others. Now, joining me today to discuss this particular very important and very interesting topic, which is ending the World Bank or International Monetary Fund occupation in Africa through debt. Particularly, we shall put into perspective the case of Uganda, is a panel of distinguished lady and gentlemen from very prestigious universities here in Uganda. So joining me to discuss tonight's topic, to my extreme right, goes by the name DeanNatukunda. DeanNatukunda is a recent graduate of law from Uganda Christian University in Mukono. Thank you very much, Dean, for joining us. And when the time comes, I'll briefly and quickly let you say hello to the viewers. But thank you for honoring our invitation and joining us. Right next to Natukunda Dean is a gentleman that has been on this show a couple of times by the name's Harold Victor. The last time we were here, we were talking about, I think, what was matters to do with democracy, and we did justice to the topic. And today, you're going to put into perspective the economics of it. So thank you very much, Harold Victor. Harold Victor is a student of law at Nkumba University. Right next to Harold Victor is Laker Aliana, right? Joanita from Kyambogo University. Thank you very much, Laker, for joining us for this wonderful discussion. I'm looking forward to having you. Last but not least, the gentleman from West Nile, my brother Lemi Frank. Thank you very much for joining us. He's from West Nile, but he studies in MBALE at the branch of Islamic University in Uganda, IU. Thank you for joining me. So from you going to Dean, just briefly say hello to the viewers and, quick thoughts maybe just as we enter into the conversation.
Hello, dear viewers. My name is Lemi Frank, as earlier on introduced. Third-year student of law from the Islamic University in Uganda. IU commonly known as MBALE main campus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're definitely thrilled and looking forward to having an engaging conversation with you. Right next to Lemi, as I said, and the only lady on the show, Laker, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laker Joanita JulIet Aliana. Third-year student, Environmental Science Technology at Kyambogo University. I'm also Vice President of the Kyambogo University Debate Society and Deputy CEO, Environmental Hub Uganda.
Okay.
Today we'll be discussing economics, and I'm really happy.
All right, we shall see how you relate environment and economics. Yes, what's something?
I actually forgot. I'm also the General Secretary of the Law Students Society of IU main campus. I forgot that I usually do not introduce the titles. I let people to do it. But when I had her say,
sorry, I didn't
but when I had introduced herself, I so picked interest, and yes, I'm the General Secretary of the Law Students Society.
So should I address you as honorable? You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Gentleman in a suit.
All right. After being introduced as a gentleman in a suit, then I have no choice but to also talk about my honors. All right. My name is Harold. My name is Sewanonda Harold Victor. God forgive me for the times I began with Harold. Now I know I am of African descent and I'm proud. All right. So I am the debate president of Nkumba University. At the same time, I double as a Central Region Coordinator for Uganda Debate President's Council. I do pretty much a lot of things. I do deal with public speech, debate, trainings, and all sorts of things. But what is most important to this particular channel is that I have certain views that I believe are credible and could be heard by the right stakeholders. I'm glad and thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Drake.
Definitely looking forward to seeing you put your communication skills into use into this debate. DeanNatukunda, sir.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today. It's a privilege to be here. Hello to our viewers. It's very good work that is done. Today is my first day to be here, and thank you to Civic Space and the entire team for the good work you're doing. I'm very passionate about international relations, and I can't wait to get into the topic. Thank you so much.
Let me just stick with you. You said you're very passionate about international relations,
yes.
And tonight's topic is one that looks into international relations. We are discussing ending World Bank and International Monetary Fund occupation in Africa through debt, maybe a case in Uganda. But for purposes of driving this debate and putting it into perspective for our viewers out there, how would you categorize this debate? But and when you're categorizing the debate, I want you to show us the relationship that Uganda's had and maybe other African countries, in simple terms, the historical context, because you realize post 1960, post independence, the Bretton Woods sisters, which is World Bank and IMF, entered into contracts with a number of its colonies and countries such as Uganda, which at the moment other people are saying it's a form of neocolonialism, but we shall get into that. But briefly, contextualize for us tonight's discussion.
Thank you so much. I think it's very important for us to know where this started. And back in 1944, when the World Bank and IMF, all these institutions were established, they were established with one major reason. That is to aid the then colonies of those states, that is Britain, and to come out of perhaps poverty. That was the whole analogy that was sort of like painted by the formers of that ideology of the institutions. So driving fast forward into the future, 1944, 1948, 1946, all the years that have come before independence, after independence, it's important for people or our viewers to also understand that this topic has been, its buttress has gone deep in the African continent, that it has been a discussion long overdue. It's been a discussion that they haven't talked about enough, how the IMF and the European Union and all those institutions, the World Bank, have gone on to sort of like destabilize and sort of like fit their feet in our economies, that is the African economies. Fast forward 1962, we get independence, and everything that happens after that is we are getting donations, grants from all these institutions, IMF, and the argument is going to be that yes, they give with little or small interest, 1%, 2%, whatever interest, depending on all these other institutions, but trying to put it into perspective, like you've said, the historical sort of like bit of it was starting from the rationale. Why were these institutions put in place? Because they already perceived the African people as poor, and they already perceived as them that people that needed help, or institutions and governments that needed help. So they formed these institutions to actually, the question is whether they were actually formed to keep the African continent as the dark continent, as they referred it to, or to actually rejuvenate Africa and take it to the next level. But that, I think, shall come in the conversations that we're going to have. But trying to put it into perspective is that the EU, the World Bank, the IMF, where they are situated, whatever their values are, whatever things they are looking at doing, is directed to the whole analogy that Africans need help, Africans need financial assistance, governments need financial assistance, and the only way that can happen is through granting them loans. And that is how it has been throughout history. Because if I'm to state, literally every country, even the most successful countries, actually survive from these loans. So I think today's discussion is basically centered on us understanding what is the impact, what impact has these institutions and their loans had on our governments, on our people, on our economies, on our standard of living, on our GDPs, on our income, on everything that can literally be connected to the economic wavelength of any country in Africa.
Thank you
so much.
We shall definitely delve into the impact, because from what I understand and what I know, World Bank has had all the greatly contributed to the growth of our GDP. But maybe my panelists could disagree tonight and tell me otherwise, but we shall get to that. Yeah. Harold, from where Dean has talked, he gives us a very wonderful historical perspective and context to tonight's conversation. What I want to understand, he brings us way from 1945 to possibly post-independence. But I wanted to pick up from the period when you understand when Amin came into power and after Amin left. Uganda, they categorized us as to be in a point of economic, could I say the word economic distress? We were in a point whereby we were too low. And the only option that the NRA or NRM government had was what they termed as they should give back the properties of the Asians back. That is when they came up with the Expropriated Property Act to put back or give back the properties of the Asians, if at all we want to get money from the World Bank and IMF. Just pick from there as you open up and give us the introduction that you prepared for tonight's conversation.
All right. So the sort of introduction I prepared for today is somewhat radical. Why? Because I believe that things like slavery, things like colonialism have never ended.
Yeah.
They rather rebranded. Something, if you've watched the movie known as The Matrix, Morpheus tells Neo that one of the strongest prisons is a prison you can never see, smell, touch, nor see, a prison of the mind. So we would want to all agree to one particular thing, that there's just been a rebrand of colonialism and a rebrand of slavery.
Yeah.
Why? Literally one important thing. What thing do you chase at the end of the day? What we normally chase, what Africans chase is money. And who makes the money? It's the Federal Reserve, it's the World Bank, and who has association over that money. So he who controls the money then controls the policies that people then have to do. See, it's like you've just said. So when it happened that the Asians were expelled out of Uganda and the NRM government came, for them to be able to secure funds, because yes, you understand the NRM, the economy was just recovering from war. War is very disastrous, and they had to recover, so they had to get loans. And things like regional integrations by that time weren't actually that strong and that firm, and the only sort of plausible solution they had was getting loans. So yes, now they get the loans, and those loans have strings attached to them at the end of the day. And it has always been the modus operandi of the World Bank, the modus operandi of the European Union, the modus operandi of the United Nations Organization, right? I think you are also a believer in Karl Marx's philosophy of the whole idea of impartation of ideology. And sometimes ideology is imparted either peacefully or harshly. The Africans themselves had their own culture. They had their own sort of belief system. And you said you'd go into neocolonialism later on, but we need to understand one small thing, that 60% of the arable land in the world is found within Africa. Very many resources like uranium that are used for making nuclear weapons are found within Africa. But none of African countries have capacity to making nuclear weapons at the end of the day. So this system is rigged and built in a way that a lot is removed from this small place that feeds the whole world, and little is given back to it, and it should remain like that at the end of the day. So this whole idea of the homosexuality bill, it is just bringing out a thing that has always been in the dark, a prison of the mind, and we're now getting to see it with our own physical eyes and know that, oh well, see, we have no autonomy over the things we do. Drake, one last point. You need to know the whole idea of international law, like my brother said, is just an international law is the whole idea of autonomy of states. That is why I actually have international law. But the international law does not actually deal with autonomy of states, because it in and of itself is already flawed. Even if you look at the operation of the UN, where the main members, it's called the Security Council, right? And the 5 permanent members, if they all don't veto a decision, then no one else can actually go against them. For example, if USA decides to invade Uganda today, the national law is not going to touch them. So you wonder, was the national law a system of protecting states or a system of state control for the whole world? That's a question maybe I will leave for the rest of the audience to answer.
On that point, you just remind me of one of the lectures I had in international law. And the question my lecturer posed was, is international law or is international law politics? But I shall get it. I think in that discussion, when I was in class, I pondered and I answered. I said, you see, international law, in my opinion, is just not politics. It's not law, it's not politics, but it's politics of the powerful. Which I think in tonight's conversation we should maybe look into that and see that the powerful actually control these coffers and control our laws and how we run our economies. But that aside, let me get to you, Joanita. Give us your introduction to tonight's debate. What do you think about this topic?
Okay, I think coming here, the gist of the matter was on how best we think we could end this kind of like occupation of IMF and World Bank. You see, I think from what Harold already tells us is that we have been subjected to a sort of a situation in which we feel caged as Africans, right?
Yeah.
And it looks from perspectives of how we're offering you loans, but then there are certain kinds of like strings that need to be attached to it. There's certain sort of like obligations that you need to fulfill as sort of like a give back. For me, I feel that kind of like infringes on what even IMF itself stands for. Because I mean, if you're there in going to, promote an element of, economic development in a particular kind of country, and yet you're equally talking of a situation in which you don't want disparities to exist, and you're saying that elements of discrimination should not exist within that kind of country. Like, it doesn't show a situation in which they're trying to fulfill their sole obligation. Takes me back to the question of autonomy and sovereignty. I think that every country has its own element of sovereignty, and that needs to be respected. So maybe going forward, the whole IMF issue could even not be on the issues of discrimination and things like that. It's on the issues of the fact that a country like Uganda has decided to stand up and say, we are not going to support homosexuality and lesbianism and the likes, right? And it feels as though, okay, who do you think you are to actually stand up against us? So at the end of the day, it still draws back to the bottom line and the basis of infringement on autonomy, infringement on sovereignty. It paints a picture where they probably think that, Africans now want to begin sidelining themselves from us. I've seen very many people raising questions of, why are you going to China? Why are you going to Russia? They should equally question countries like South Africa who subscribe to the BRICS. And for me, that is it.
Thank you. Something that cuts across all the arguments here is the aspect of state sovereignty. I see very young, passionate Africans who love their countries and want to foster different perspective to this continent. And Lemi, when you have this conversation, excuse me, deep down I have this fire, I have this zeal that, okay, I listen to the submissions of Dean, I listen to the submissions of Harold, and then my sister Lake, and then in my mind I'm like, all right, I think Africa is on the right trajectory. But then you realize that where we are at the moment, that a country like Uganda who possibly has no say on the table of the big boys, possibly actually there is what they say, if you are a son or if you are a child or if you are an orphan, you pick pieces of advice when you're sitting outside next to the door of some of the elders who are inside. So Uganda at this point, we are like that orphan. We do not have a strong say, but we just sit outside and then have to dance to the tune of the Bretton Woods sisters. What have you prepared for us in tonight's debate, in your own context, in your own opinion, before we delve into the gist of tonight's discussion?
Well, in my own opinion, I want to agree to the notion that when the world changed and the social order changed with economic struts from the former days of slavery, from the days of colonialism, and the world said, no, we cannot be upholding this kind of thing. It's high time we shift the the new kind of social order. And that is when power shifted from those who had colonies to those who have the money. Apparently, if you look at Uganda, our GDP and everything and our economy and all that stuff, we are a country that is drowning. We seem to be in a deep water pool, and we seem to catch any kind of passing object in hope for survival. The Western world came here. They have exploited Africa to its best, exploited Uganda to its best. And now, because of the anti-homosexuality thing, they're saying no. And where is Uganda heading to? Uganda is heading to China to get money. Uganda is heading to Russia. Do you think the Russians, the Chinese, are going to give Uganda money at the best interest of Ugandans, or it's at the best interest of the imperialism of the Chinese people? Well, that's a question we shall answer later on. However, one thing I want to know, I subscribe to a view that actually to a minority of the Ugandans who feel like homosexuality is not a Western thing. Neither is it a thing that is far from our cultures. If we are to dig deep into the African culture, into the ancient and ways our grandparents and our former leaders, say the Kabakas, the kings of those days behaved.
Yeah.
Actually, if you look at several military, if you talk to several people who have been the veterans, they will tell you that one of the ways of punishing captives was through sodomy. So this is purely an African thing that we're trying to sideline because we feel we are more religious to religions that came through a boat.
Radical argument. That's very radical.
I feel like, well, that's my opinion.
Yeah,
However, when we go further, I want to agree that If a country feels this is what we want, then so be it. However, let the enactment of the law be through the peaceful voting of people in a hidden ballot. This homosexuality thing was voted for openly, which I'm sure there are parliamentarians who did not want to vote for it, but because of the fact that it was on live camera and the Speaker of Parliament was intimidating them. Honorable so-and-so, are you for homosexuality or against homosexuality? And they unanimously voted against it because of fear of losing their seats in 2026. However, this is going to cost the ordinary Ugandan a lot. It's going to cost the ordinary Ugandan to the bone. 2 days ago, I was watching news and mayors in other cities, in several designated cities, Arua, MBALE, Toro, Gulu, are crying out loud and asking themselves, where are we going to get money from to work the city that actually was designated in 2021, which was actually to be given money from the World Bank, which is no more.
So just before you go into that conversation of economic impact, which I delve into right now, I'll get back to you. Let me engage Dean. We have the conversation of impact because you mentioned that you want to discuss in depth the impact that these Bretton Woods sisters have had in Uganda and in other African countries. Because tonight's discussion looking at ending the occupation through debt. You understand that is how they've been controlling African countries, and that is how they've managed to maintain the relationship and ties with most African countries. Now, you realize that a World Bank, IMF contribute a lot in terms of human capital development. They provide a lot of resources for building schools, building schools, building hospitals, among other programs. But also that aside, they give a lot of money in terms of supporting our budget. And then you realize now when World Bank goes ahead and says we're not going to offer loans to Uganda because the law that you passed is against our values. This has a drastic impact, as my brother Lemi was bringing it out. That you see there are some programs that are going to be halted because we do not have the resources. Speak to the heart of impact.
Thank you so much for that very important question about the impact of the IMF and the World Bank on, most specifically, how we are looking at it today, the case of Uganda. Now, I don't want to deviate a lot in answering your question from the perspective, and me, I like speaking from the local perspective. Someone who is operating the taxi in the old tax park, how would they view or how would they receive the impact of the World Bank and their loans and grants whatsoever? Now, sustained, let me put it to this. Most people in this world have played a game called chess. Now, chess has levels. There may not be levels, but they are like phases. You have the pawns, you have the level that has the knights, you have the level that has the queen, the king, and whatever protects them. Now, the way chess has been played over the years is that it's close to impossible to move the queen. Or if you're actually a master of the game, you can't move the queen before you move the pawn. Now, that directs me to my conversation of, the part on how the countries have been separated. We have the first world countries, so-called developed, second, middle, there, and third world countries. Now, in Africa, the ones that have managed to break to that bit of like second, developing or developed, close to developed countries is South Africa, which contributes, I think, it contributes over $5 billion USD to the World Bank. Now, one of the most important things I want us to delve into today as a case study of Uganda is to look at what is, in directing to the impact, the loans that come vis-a-vis our GDP and how it has grown. What would be the difference if these loans didn't come? And what would be the growth rate if these loans had actually come and used either in the right way or wrong way, keeping all factors constant, ceteris paribus? I want us to look at what is that part that sort of like defines the growth of an economy. My brother said that the impact of these loans have, helped us talk about, growth of the economy, the GDP has gone up. But then to what percentage? Our GDP has been stagnant over I don't know how many years. We have been so young and we are now getting old, and you know the GDP has been stagnant around there. Case in example, looking at the IMF and World Bank, the United States, if you're to look at the last 10 or so presidents of the World Bank, I think we have only one who is from Bulgaria, and that is like the last three in the row, yeah. But most of them are from the United States. And the statement, I don't know if, but previously I was reading and I saw a statement from the Senate of the United States that was, you know, pushing sort of like the World Bank to try and, you know, cut the aid that is coming to Uganda because of the law. Now, the impact of these loans, it has first of all put us in a very big debt burden. Now, previously, Mr. Moderator, you talked about the part of, you know, it has helped us work on our debt, but it is estimated that by the end of this financial year, the one that just started in, I think, June, it starts in June. By the end of this financial year, our debt shall cross 50%. You get? Where we are using almost 30 to 40% of our budget to do debt financing. Now, it takes me back to my question. That I've given you a small local perspective. Now, that won't leave our shilling the same. When that statement came from World Bank, that call happened, and then the sort of like rebuttal from the president, the shilling was stable for over, you know, like a few months there. But I mean, you could sleep today and the dollar is, I don't know what, I haven't checked today, but yesterday the dollar was at 3.7, I think, 3.729. And it has been, you know, constantly rotating around 3.4. But then the events that have happened with the World Bank, you see what has happened to our shilling. Now that is going to even have more gross effects because we are already suffering from inflation, I mean. So if inflation is going to happen, what is going to be putting us to the level where we even attract more investors? Actually, investors are going to be like, so I need now more resources to actually do the importation I've been doing. Or I need, why? Because of the strings attached that the lady talked about, because of the financial constraints that come with these loans. Because remember, IMF and World Bank don't just give you the loans. You have to dance to their tunes. And Uganda has been one of the best dancers on the stage, which is quite absurd to speak about, but it's the reality. And the fact of us being a third world country, of course, there are arguments, and there will always be those who argue. And the president has also come out to say that, you know, Uganda has moved from low income to middle income. But that is like someone can say that everyone is entitled to their opinion. It's very hard to walk around Uganda and actually believe that we are a middle income country. So being a third world country with a very exorbitant budget, that most of the money goes into public administration, not even to very important aspects of
development.
Yeah. It's very, and I think those are some of the strings attached that come with these loans that come, because perhaps some of the money, we can never know the real story. And everyone is entitled, yes, to their opinion, but one thing is for sure. These debts, if it was an argument, they could have caused, or they have caused more harm than good, because the impact of these debts is something that is deep-rooted, something that has become an addiction to us to the extent that our debt burden is growing at a rate where a lot of states, a lot of countries survive on debt, this is on record. This is common knowledge. The United States, the UK, a lot of states. But a country like Uganda, where you spend almost 40% of your budget, national budget, to do debt financing, you can't jubilate or you can't rejoice in the fact that a loan is going to come.
You don't even finish the debt.
Yes, and you don't even finish the debt. You can't rejoice in the fact that a loan is going to come from World Bank or IMF to support 20% of your budget, which that same budget, 40% is supporting debt financing.
All right. Thank you. Harold, Dean poses a very important question. We talk about development, we talk about the growth of our GDP, and he says to what extent. He highlights the argument that we get these debts, and it's in a way increases on the debt burden of our country, and 40% of the money that we possibly get at our budget is used for debt financing, which in one or the other we are more like just rotating in a circle that possibly will not lead us to development. So my question to you therefore is, notwithstanding the impact that on paper these particular loans, these particular monies have on our economies, from facilitating human capital development to helping put up hospitals, among other programs, do you then think that this particular action by Uganda, the response that the president made, that we shall survive even without your loans, do you think that at this point in time, Uganda has made the right move that will not only help us reduce on our debt, yes, on our debt burden, and possibly the exorbitant expenditure we have as a country, but what does also this mean to the African continent? What picture does it create?
All right, thank you for that opportunity, Drake. Right, so I had a lot of things to say, but then he must have said much of it. But let me start from the particular question. All right, so it's just important to have a little retrospect, right, on what has led to this particular situation. And in a way, we need to have a particular retrospect of what has led to this particular question. And in a way, I would like to have a response back to what my brother had to say, right? So one thing we need to know is that this particular whole idea of IMF refusing to give money to Uganda and Muzei responding the way he responded is much bigger than just homosexuality. And this is now how we need to draw the line. So with all due respect, intellectual respect to my brother, I think what he said about gayism and all is just short sight. And if you look into the bigger picture, this is not just one law that has been made. This is continuous intrusion in the affairs of African states. This is much bigger than homosexuality, because if our law, just like how Muzei said when he was writing down, if our law is bad, we shall then what? Fix it, right? If we pass a law about homosexuality that looks to be detrimental to some people, questions of domestic law can only be answered by domestic law. It's why we have things like amendment. My brother is a lawyer, you're a lawyer, right? We have laws that are taken back for revision and amendment. So if this particular law has a problem that aligns with our sort of values as Africans, whether or not they are our values anymore, then I think that law could still be taken back for review and amendment. But at a point in time, use that as a threshold to then try to take away loans and to control us is when you go against the whole principle of autonomy. Now, the third thing we need to understand that if it is bad, okay, like another thing we need to understand is the whole idea of, like what Dean was saying, how many third world countries have been able to become fast for a long period of time? A wise man once said that stupidity is doing the same thing all over again and expecting different what? Results. Thank you. So one thing we need to understand and comprehend at the end of the day is that yes, the loans have been taken away from us, and Muzei, a Pan-African, is not willing to allow that. I think now we are better off into looking at other alternatives. And the ultimate question is, are there certain countries that have not relied on loans from the World Bank, and are they not thriving? As long as we have certain countries, like let's give an example of maybe South Korea, Singapore, India, and maybe Brazil, that have tried to go away from these particular loans and they are still thriving, that is testimony enough that we can do what? Do something else. I think this particular thing that Museveni does is not just stopping homosexuality, it is a statement. It is a start of new things. It is a start of Africanicity, of Pan-Africanism. Why? Because one of the solutions you can actually even look at as to why we even get loans is that sometimes we misuse our own funds. I think if you go into strengthening policies, removing things like corruption, having funds signed the right way at the end of the day, you will then need no response. Why would you even need loans at the end of the day? Like I said, stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Yes, I would agree that it could be true or credible that yes, the loans from World Bank have helped us in a way, but such loans, if you look at our GDP, I hold the radical view that our GDP had to improve over time. due to the advancement of things like technology, due to Africans getting more civilized and more literate and more studied, it had to increase.
It has stayed stagnant.
Yeah, so it couldn't stay stagnant at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of them having given us the loans or not, I would go ahead to argue that our GDP still had to improve. And the little increment we will see is not an excuse to say that we need World Bank loans. Now, I urge you on a utilitarian kind of perspective when I say, yes, some sectors are going to lack out, but we're looking at the greater good at the end of the day. If you cut off this sort of loan supply and get rid of dependability and you start to depend on yourself at the end of the day, then you are better off going to develop more sectors than doing a circle like he has been describing. To sum it all up, what has happened to countries that have tried to get away from sort of neocolonialism? Look at Zimbabwe, the Africanization policy that was done by Mugabe. What happened was that once he turned all the land, most of it that was within the country, to be for the natives within that particular land, they put bans on him, trade bans on him. Now it wasn't the World Bank, or IMF saying, "I'm not going to give you loans anymore because of our law." It was another sort of system. If you look at this, it's just the same games that have been played by the elite of the world to control a continent that is full of rich of resources. I don't want it to have any sort of self-autonomy. So maybe if the questions go into what solutions do we have, then I could actually give a number of solutions that we could have, borrowing from what South Korea has done, from what Singapore has done, from what Brazil has done, and none of that involves taking of loans from the World Bank. Thank you.
We'll get to the solutions. My sister, Joanita, Dean highlights key impact, but that this loan has, notwithstanding what particularly they do. He highlights the debt burden. He highlights a number of factors. My brother Harold makes it clear. Yeah, he brings it clear. And now, my question to you is: you realize that as a country, we have corruption, which is a vice that has eaten up our economy to the brim. We at the moment won't be getting loans from World Bank, or we shan't access loans from World Bank or IMF because we are contravening with our values, which is against discrimination. Now, that said, you realize that we are going to have, we must survive with what we have. And what we have oftentimes is embezzled, is corrupted, among others. So what do you think? What other source of funding do we possibly then have, apart from the national collection that will be done by URA? But if we also have an alternative, how can we then fight that disease of corruption to help us sustain ourselves?
Okay, I think before we even get solutions as to how we can fight that element of corruption, I'll pick up from what Harold said. The IMF sort of coming up on board and saying we are no longer going to be offering loans and elements of financing should itself be direct or indirect, sort of like already a solution that Africans should pick up, right? It should be sort of like a morale booster to say, hey, these things have been coming. It's more like we have been eating from the Western world, which apparently came and, colonized us and things like that. So it is high time we sort of like picked up that element of Pan-Africanism. I understand it's every man and his stomach, but this should sort of like paint for us a scenario in which we begin to understand that there needs to be an element of solidarity lest we fall down as a country.
Yeah.
Going back to the question of corruption and things like that, government now needs to make it clear that whoever is held culpable for an element or a scenario of corruption is sort of like going to be punished in one way or another. I think that is the only best solution, in my opinion. It is the only best solution that we have towards fighting corruption. Because we've reached a point in time where, number one, we want to sort of like protect our element of sovereignty. So it's now a question of sovereignty vis-a-vis holding people who are embezzling even the list of funds that we have accountable. So for the element of corruption or the question of corruption, it's all about those who have been, sort of like found culpable. You definitely go ahead and imprison them and make sure that you bring in people on board who are able to see to it that these funds are sort of like utilized in the best possible means. But even other alternative sources of funding, we've seen friends like China coming on board. Yes, they may continue to offer loans that are sort of like with high kinds of like interest, but I think it's still worth it. For me, this whole scenario should be an encouragement.
On that point, before you proceed, right now we're having a conversation on funding from World Bank and IMF. We're trying to put an end to it. you suggest that we should opt for other alternatives,
Yeah,
such
the-
as China,
another whole
China.
which have very high rates, but also have very tougher and stringent measures,
I understand.
such as taking our national airport.
And could also be part of the World
No,
Bank.
but I equally understand where you're trying to come from. However, my whole point is, in order for us to go ahead and protect our element of sovereignty from the Western world, then it would still be prudent for us to try out those other alternatives.
On that point, protecting sovereignty, you realize that a country like
I-
China still
An airport.
an airport is a symbol of sovereignty of a state. How then do you say that allying with a country like China will still make us protect our sovereignty?
But that is all based on the element of what kind of like deals you then go ahead and cut in.
Those deals are the
with-
same deals
with-
that will make us definitely appear.
with
But
countries
proceed.
like China. But either way, I feel that at the end of the day, even when you're talking of, okay, China coming to take up a national airport and things like that, we are still looking at scenarios where China is still being the very one developing that airport. So if it still goes ahead to benefit us, well and good.
I think I heard a very radical view. I don't know, as a moderator, if I'm allowed to be my
It's okay.
opinion. But you see, I feel as a continent, I feel as a country, we are so rich to the extent that we can develop on our own. You realize that a country just must just have that political will to push itself to the brim. Look at how the Western world's developed.
Singapore,
Just
for example.
Singapore. Thank you, Singapore. How did they develop? Look at the policies they had in place. Look at the zeal and the motivation and all. Look at the Asian tigers, how they developed.
In fact, look at
I think
countries that were
it's
hit.
the more reason as
Like-
why
and
The
I
World
think
War, Hiroshima and
As
Nagasaki.
Africa,
the more reason as why I started by saying
Socialism.
it is sort of like a morale booster for us
All
to
right.
begin,
Perfect.
to work harder.
let me
But
get
even
the
that
point.
said, that does not stop us from, looking for other alternative countries that we can get loans from.
I think regional integration is a safer measure than
A
going to
safer
China.
kind of
Possibly.
mechanism.
Like it's a
from
better
civic
community.
trade.
Let us-
It's a safer
Let us
one
listen
than
from the
China.
gentleman
Okay.
who provided a very distinct radical view against for anti-homosexuality
Well,
and the impact this particular
before I
law will
actually
have.
go further,
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the game of boxing.
Mm.
And in the game of boxing, never will it ever be that a lightweight boxer and a heavyweight boxer will be put in the same ring.
Yeah.
So when my brother compares Uganda to countries like Brazil in terms of development, Uganda, one, is a landlocked country. Two, Uganda is a country that is as small as a stone in someone's shoe. Uganda is basically a country that actually needs the helping hand of a mother to remove that stone in a child's shoe. So you cannot come up and say you're going to compare Uganda's development rate to that of Brazil or Singapore or
Brazil
something.
doesn't take
But
loans.
can I? Well, what I'm basically trying to say is that we are at a point in this country whereby we have the resources, the natural resources given from nature. I don't want to say God has, okay, yes, from God, nature. And one fact we have to appreciate is that even though we mine these resources and fully exploit them, the question of appropriation, the question of priority, the question of corruption will always come into the picture. Being in a country whereby the head of state came into power from a guerrilla warfare, he has to protect the interests of his people who he fought with in the bush. And I can vividly say it on this floor and anywhere else in this country that even though any corruption law is amended or put into place,
You still feel
it
it
will
will not be
never
implemented?
work as long as it is having a bush war veteran or having a son, a daughter of a bush war veteran. It can never work. That can only come back to the question of, first of all, upholding the principles of democracy to have an elected government that is going to work in the best interest of the people. One of the policies that made Singapore really develop was having a policy of socialism, in that people worked for the best interest of the country rather than their own
Ambition.
self-development and self-ambition, which is not the case in Uganda. In Uganda, we are partially social, we are partially under socialism and greatly under capitalism. Because people in Uganda benefit more from their individual works than the state benefits more from everyone's individual effort.
Yeah.
That is why they pay salaries rather than paying tuition or school fees for your kids, rather than giving them medication. So my question runs down, and to answer people's different views that had come about due to my submission. You know, when we talk about borrowing from China, borrowing from other friends, this is an allusion to digging a hole to fill another. Because at the end of the day, China lends African countries at a business rate. What I mean by the business rate, it's not going to give loans to Uganda as it would give, as the World Bank has been giving to Uganda as a nation. The World Bank will give Uganda loans at rates less than 8%. The highest rate was in 2008, the 2008 crisis of the dollar. A time when the dollar was extremely high compared to the shilling, no? And then the 2001 saga in Argentina and the 1999 saga in Asia. Those are the times when the World Bank rates really rose so high. Now, you're going to China, you are running. It's like you're getting out of the frying pan into the direct fire. China is going to give you a loan at 18% interest rate because it looks at you as a businessman. It looks at you as someone who's profit-oriented.
Maybe as we get into the break, what option then do you have to offer? What alternative do you have to offer?
Improving the capability and capacity of citizens to work in the best regard of the country, eliminating corruption in the field, which is a dream.
All right, thank you. I understand there is a lot that has to be said, but we have to go for a short break. But we'll come back. Please stick with us. Tonight we're discussing ending World Bank and International Monetary Fund occupation in Africa through a case study of Uganda. Stick with us. Conversation is hot and interesting. We'll be right back.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from that break. Right before we went into the break, we had a very heated conversation in the studio right now. And I would like to start with you, Harold. My question is going to be in line of policy analysis, the recommendations that the World Bank has offered Uganda for us to access these loans. Particularly, we should possibly revise that particular law that is against the values of discrimination. Speak to the issue of policy analysis to the recommendations they offer to Uganda. But also, before we went to a break, you were itching and burning to respond to my brother here. Please proceed.
Right. So I wouldn't regard it as itching and burning, but as rather a little bit of correction, right, in certain regards. So my brother had something to say about Uganda being partly communist, right, and capitalist. We need to ask ourselves the ultimate question, and I think it's why my brother Dean puts on this wonderful shirt. Yeah. What has caused the particular communism and capitalism, or a mixed sort of sector? If you remember during the times of the Cold War, right? When Museveni comes into power, when Milton Obote brings, I think, the pigeonhole, that sort of policy that is communist, right, in nature, and then he gets overthrown. Another person comes on top, was another sort of policy. Look at the policy that was done, I think, in Tanzania by Julius Nyerere, right, of communism, and he was still removed. So the reason as why you have things like communism and capitalism is because of the dominance of the West, that maybe the Soviet Union wanted this for the particular colonies, and then the NATO wanted this for the particular colonies. So the reason as why we even have that confusion of some Ugandans being communists and others being capitalists is entirely dependent on the West that brought capitalism and communism to us. So besides as African cultures, we did everything as a whole, as a community, different communities doing their own things.
Which makes it a socialist
right
kind of environment.
Yeah, but then your point was that there's confusion, right, of capitalism and socialism.
I think
So,
he has a problem with here.
right, cool. All right, so then answering to the whole issue of corruption, you see, corruption has always been handled badly within, I think, Africa. And I don't know if I could give examples of other states where corruption has been handled. And if I do that, if my brother won't say, is Uganda that state, right? Because I think that sort of debating is unfair. If I give examples of Brazil or South Korea that have adjusted,
It's fair enough.
yeah, it's fair enough to borrow a leaf. You don't say we're going to compare that to that. Now let me compare Saudi Arabia, right, to other countries, other countries within the Islamic countries. Corruption there is there, but limited. Why is it so? It's not because they don't have laws like we do, but it's because they make it hard. Even if you wanted to be corrupt, the sort of punishment they put for you will make you not want to be corrupt. One thing you need to understand as human beings that we share a sort of double nature, dual nature. We are both good and bad, capable of being corrupt and not capable of being corrupt. But as long as we give you a reason not to be corrupt, even if you wanted to, we tend to cure that sort of thing. But at the moment you bring such radical laws on things like corruption, what is going to happen? IMF, we are here. What is going to happen? European Union, we are here. So we never even get to implement actual things that would have worked for us. Because even if Africa gets to develop, like Libya tried its best to develop, what happened to El Muammar Gaddafi? Who got involved? NATO. What reason did they have? Under international law, you only get involved in case of attack, right? And self-defense. They used a reason of humanitarian reasons to go there and milk the oil within Libya. At a point in time, we fail to look at these things and become Pan-Africanists, then we tend to lose, right? Then let's look at the whole thing of maybe solutions, right? What particular solutions could we have and the policies? I think, and I repeat the same point, this point is much bigger than homosexuality. If tomorrow we make a law on abortion, the IMF will still say the same thing, that your law of abortion is not inclusive. Or let's say we make a law that there are only two genders in Uganda. They will still say you're not inclusive of the people who identify as cameras, as those who identify as fields. They will keep on doing the same thing. Now, my point was that for as long as we are dependent on them, they will always control us, not because of one law of homosexuality, but of every single other law that we can do. So let's borrow a leaf from things that have actually worked. What then could we do as Uganda? First of all, I talked about fixing our own domestic issues themselves, right? But then you can look at things like domestic resource mobilization, then export diversification, whereby we channel most of our industries towards exports that then tend to benefit us. We can look at things like investment in productive sectors, attracting foreign direct investment, many things like development of capital markets, right? Because we get to realize that the capital market sector within Uganda, the particular few people who have done the law on capital markets, it's actually very underdeveloped. We can do so many things like even promoting our own resource utilization. But at the point in time, we also want to mine our own oil. What happens? EACOP comes up. I mean, the European Union comes up. You shouldn't mine your own oil because it's dangerous for the climate. At a point in time, and the funny thing is that the same sort of politicians who say climate change is real are the same that build houses by the lakes, right? In those agrarian spaces where climate change would actually hit them. Which makes us question ourselves, is it something that is a problem of Africa, or is it a problem given to Africa by those who think rule Africa on its behalf? So what is the way forward? There are a number of positions, and as long as we have seen certain countries do certain things, and they reach somewhere, you see, Brazil maybe could be a fair example, like what my brother said, but Brazil is also not the most developed. Brazil is not first world, right? But we see it trying to develop and reaching particular areas. How did Singapore do it? Okay, if you want to know how bad the situation is, I think I was pondering, and the question you can all ponder. How comes that a country that was hit with nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that went down back to zero, is far better than you, who was not hit by anything? Were you backward? Or was there a problem with Africa in itself? Or is there something they do to us as Africa that never makes us go on top? The question I asked was very simple. Have you ever seen a third world country ever diverse into first world, particularly within Africa? I think Libya tried. What happened to Libya? The story is already told.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting arguments he raises. Dean, your shirt speaks volumes. Your shirt highlights the fact that you are a Pan-Africanist and you believe in the views that my brother Harold highlights. And you see, I just lose words when Harold paints for us that picture that you see. Show me just one third world country that has progressed possibly to a first world country in Africa. None. Libya tried it, and Gaddafi was assassinated on grounds of humanitarian reasons. Now, I just want us to look into still policy analysis, look into the recommendations that IMF and World Bank give Uganda for us to access these loans, but two, debt management. What policies have Uganda put in place to then possibly work on our debt management? You realize that when various ministries wrote to the president requesting for him to assent to for loans for them to access, the president declined a number of loans. Now, are those strategies very effective, and could they be plausible for us to move forward and move away from the dependency syndrome that we have?
Thank you so much. That's a very important question. And where do I want to start? I want to start at the core values of the World Bank. One of its core values is innovation. They have another is called impact. The other they have is called respect. Now, basing my submission on those core values, I would first of all have a submission that in their reactionary message, which is actually not a message of absolute, like, stamped or written in stone, because if you read that message clearly, they say that they sent in, or that letter from World Bank, they say they sent in observers who came and on the ground, and then they did their research and actually found out that the law was discriminatory as they believed in whatever areas they are in, which is a very interesting argument, because if you look at that law specifically, it doesn't look at saying that someone being gay is a problem. The problem is actually someone promoting this activity and advertising it. And anyone could argue that it's coming, or it's coming into place. That's the law. It has given it even more water for us to keep talking about it, which has even publicized it some more, which is really like a snap of the finger, because literally now everywhere you talk about gayism. Previously, it was even weird for someone to have told a conversation about gays. So I think it is important for us to note what are the after effects, what are the spillover effects of this law, which is very important, but a law being misunderstood from the World Bank. And their reaction could have been, to me, I think it could have been better, because they could have maybe done more research about what was the rationale. In law school, there is something they call the mischief rule, something they use to interpret laws or statutes. And it is highly based on the fact that before we interpret a law, we need to understand what was that mischief it came to cure. And the mischief that the Anti-Homosexuality Bill Now Act came to cure was not someone can't be a homosexual. Be a homosexual, be that person, but then don't sort of like lure other people to come and join you in your movement. You get? So understanding that, I feel like that has been misunderstood from point one. Secondly, about your question of policy, I think it is also important for us to not get ahead of ourselves as a country. My arguments from the start are highly hinged or highly based on the fact that we are a third world country, and argument rotates on whether we are low income or middle income. It's very hard for the ditch we are in right now to get out by our own selves. True. And if it is to happen, then we shall need to sort of like resurrect the late president of Singapore, known for moving the country from third world to first world, and that is Lee Q something. He moved he moved the country from third world to first country, but the country at the time he was moving had the latitude to move at that pace. Right now, with the development, with the infrastructure, with the whole insurgence of the word global village and its practicability, it's very hard to close off. China had to close off after the fall of the Soviet Union and socialism. It had to close off and re-emphasize on itself before it can explode outwards. But right now, is it practical? Is it possible? That is a question to dear economists out there, those that advise the government, those that sit on the parliamentary economic committees and advise about economic policies in this country. Is closing off the best option? To me, my opinion, and everyone is entitled to his, closing off is not the best option. The best option rather is let's wait for the negotiations that are going to happen between Uganda and the World Bank.
Yeah.
We see what, and I'm highly optimistic and actually positive that those negotiations are going to yield fruit. They're going to yield fruit. It's very hard to say that we are going to close off a 20% support to our budget, yet our budget has 40% debt financing. That means now we shall, if we close off that 20%, that means our debt financing could go up to 50%, which will make that half of the budget, and frustrating given the sort of like expansive nature of our public administration, our military sector. You get? Our military sector is growing at a very high rate. I don't know whether people are realizing that.
Yeah.
SFC and all those people, they are growing at a very high rate. The numbers are increasing every day. And that has also made the portion of the national cake put to that sector of security bigger. So the policies that are very important for us right now is to sort of like revisit. I think the budget is going to be rediscussed. I think after that statement, the Minister of Finance was able to communicate to Parliament that the budget is going to be rediscussed in Parliament, to re-strategize, to see what is important and what is not. And I think that is a good starting step, but closing off wouldn't be a good starting step. A good starting step would be looking at options, because the World Bank has also been criticized for a number of things like causing inflation, increasing the debt burden in countries it has facilitated, and maintaining the status quo in various countries. So it is important for us to sort of like take the World Bank on a toll, but as we are taking the World Bank on a toll, also revise our policies, how we sort of like divide our monies, that is based on the national cake. And as we revise our policies, it is also important to look at other options. She talked about the options of going to China. And actually, there is something called the Asian Development Bank, which is something very, very a feasible candidate if World Bank is not going to sustain us. It's the picture I'm trying to paint is this picture of we are so deep 40 feet and we can only come out 20 feet. But that 20 feet, you're still in the ditch. So the only way to sustain ourselves out of this is to be a little more frugal. We talked about the resources. We could mine the gold, we could mine the oil, but for how many years has the oil been talked about? I reckon the oil was talked about when we were all in primary. But to how many years are we going to still talk about this pipeline now? The pipeline, which the signs of actually being worked on, are there, yes, but the progress rate is very low. The president has gone on to say that we shall have, in Parliament, they have gone on to say that by the next financial year, oil shall be a facilitator to our budget. But I highly reckon that is the truth, or it is actually realistic. I don't think it is.
Everyone talks of 2025.
Yes, exactly. So one thing that I'm talking about right now, the picture I'm trying to paint is that closing off is not the best option, but rather strategizing and looking at our policies and evaluating them. And maybe public administration scheming, looking at how to sort of like, cut down and reduce cost in public administration, and also putting together opinions putting together, more emphasis on, important and real life sort of like experiences to the local Ugandan, that Ugandan that didn't go to school, that Ugandan that is in Kampala every day, gets that 50,000, takes it home. It's what they're going to depend on tomorrow, and then he will come again to look for that 50,000 again.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You just do justice and you offer for us a number of recommendations. Closing off is not an option. Definitely we need to look for other options. But let me get to you. You provide very radical views, and I've been yearning to listen to these radical views. Right now we are looking at possible alternatives. But before you look into the possible alternatives, I want you to speak to the sovereignty. You realize that when we opt for debt or when we get debt, it puts you in a situation that your sovereignty is undermined. That is a fact. When Uganda passed its particular law, my brother Dean mentioned that we should, before arguing, we need to understand what particular mischief it was solved. And the mischief is about luring people, luring children into the act of homosexuality, which many people do not seem to get right. And because of the law that was passed, the values of the World Bank, which is relating to discrimination among others, were infringed, which led them to make the call to the president and go ahead and halt their funding to our particular to our country's national basket. Now, my question to you is, how best can Uganda regain its sovereignty, and how best can Uganda regain its sovereignty, and what possible solutions and alternatives do you have for our country and other African countries?
Well, thank you very much. Before I answer the question of the Ugandan sovereignty, of how we can regain it, I want to caution panelists to refer to reality that is happening in Uganda, rather than having this this kind of how do I call it, imaginative composition thing that in primary we used to have these competitions of new vision where they ask you how do you see Uganda in the next 20 years. I think that's what my brother is submitting on majorly, the gentleman in the suit, because he's having very wonderful ideas that will apply to countries that are not in the reality of Uganda. The reality of Uganda is one that is a pothole capital of the world. The reality of Uganda is one whereby over 70% of the population are young people, whom majority haven't gone to school, and a little number have attained a university education with high hopes of getting jobs which are not there. The reality of Uganda is one of a health sector that is depleted to a point that even rats share the same beds as patients in some of these hospitals. So when someone comes up to submit on very wonderful ideas, I'll not dispute that, I'll appreciate that, but they do not fit in the reality of Uganda today. That is why Uganda, as submitted by our senior, I believe in the faculty of law, on faculties of laws and law schools all over the country, there's a statement that always is translated to Uganda and says senior, abera senior, meaning a senior remains a senior. Our brother had earlier on submitted very wonderful ideas, and I want to concur with him that truly, Uganda cannot survive on its own at this point of time. We have the resources, we have all kinds of things, but the issue is, what kind of country are we going to raise up of coming out of, when how do I put this? When a person has been sick, he will not be as fit as he that hasn't been sick. Basically,
but brother,
I'm coming to your question. Let me just
no. Before you go to the question,
debrief to
before you go to the question, you realize that when Harold makes his submission and gives us recommendations, those are countries that were in a particular state and moved
you see,
forward and evolved. And Uganda is not any different. Maybe the context you're
Uganda is different. We have had civil wars from 1962 to date. We have had no peaceful transition of government. We have had no particular time in this country whereby we're not being demanded. We have had no particular time in this country whereby we're not seeking for international aid. If it is so, let him come up and say, yes, in this year, Uganda funded its budget 99.9% fully from its collections of the country. And there I will say, yes, Uganda can be that. But the problem is, we live in this euphoria of a height of Uganda can be, yet Uganda can't be that without international aid. Coming to the question of what was it? Sovereignty. So my mind was back to.
You're really thinking about it so much.
I'm being disorganized by people who don't collect the reality. I'm a field person. I know what it means to be on the ground with people. Uganda, we are really not even a third world country, if I must say. We have seen there are worse areas. So, talking about sovereignty of this country, first of all, the sovereignty of Uganda can be returned back to Uganda fully if at all Uganda is dependent on itself without.
Do you realize that you're now contradicting?
No.
Earlier on said Uganda cannot develop without
what I'm
international
Even said
aid.
his fourth one.
What I'm trying to answer here is a question of sovereignty. When you ask me a question of how Uganda can regain its sovereignty,
Yeah, how?
I'm approaching that to you directly without any kind of
Maybe you
connection
need to
to my
understand
earlier
sovereignty,
on,
what sovereignty means.
to my earlier submission.
Yeah,
However, just before we get there, just like I'd said earlier on,
yeah.
we live in a reality whereby it is absolutely difficult and will take magic.
Okay.
Let me say this. If we were to be in this world alone, or if God wished that we act alone, then he could have created I don't know how many planets. How many? It is estimated that over 7.9 billion people have lived on this blue planet. So perhaps those would be the number of planets. Why am I bringing that argument? There are organizations like the World Trade Organization that have gone on to oversee and foresee trade relations and things relating to economics in the entire globe. Now, kind of like disassociating myself from the opinion of my brother, and that's respectfully, is because it is very hard to speak about sovereignty, and that is in international relations, and then associate it with complete detachment. You can still be sovereign, but rather also relating. So the point that we need sovereignty from the aspect of we need to also detach at the same time, that doesn't operate. It is very hard in our world right now to survive. Or even, like I said, I mean, in any casual arguments, it's very hard to survive alone.
The world is more and more a global village.
Yes, it's a global village. Right now, I was speaking to a colleague in Nigeria who just completed his law school. He was telling me that for him, we were doing moots together while I was at law school. He was telling me that for him, his competition is not the many people that graduate that day at his university. His competition is me, who is at Uganda Christian University. And why does he think that way? Because he's not aware what I can bring to the table. You get? If you're book readers, there is a famous author on economics, though he has lived in America. He's called Thomas Sowell. He has a book called Basic Economics. When you read it, he happens to observe and note on his various shows that when someone has been used to preferential treatment, when they are treated equally, it seems like discrimination.
Yeah.
In Uganda right now, Uganda in the World Bank, it has been receiving this money. Right now, because the tap has been
Closed.
It hasn't been fully closed, because even in the World Bank statement, they say that we are going to reassess.
The review.
We are going to review. And reviewing in itself doesn't mean
The entire.
you understand? And that is where my optimism comes in from. That the money, yes, has been coming.
Yeah.
And if I'm to conclude, the money has been coming, yes. But my point of we need to sort of like re-strategize, because the problem with Uganda is not whether the money is there or whether the resources are there or not. The problem is with strategy, you get, and impact. Because take for example, if I'm to conclude on the topic, take for example on the various youth policies that are out there, the various elderly policies that are out there, the various people with disabilities policies that are out there. All those policies yield money up to the district level. If I was to ask any of the youth that are seated with us here today, how many of you have gone to your district headquarters to actually claim for your youth money? Has anyone gone? Me, I have gone. And the money is there. So the whole idea of we are going to survive, but we need to cut off without receiving this money, no. The money has to come. The only way to best appreciate it and actually appreciate that the money has come and use it well is to re-strategize. That is why I disassociate from the opinion of my brother that, yes, Uganda is in a ditch. That one, everyone can agree. But economically, every country has been in a ditch. Every country. Actually, if you want to think that Uganda is in a ditch, go and read about the Great Depression that happened in the United States and hit the stock exchange market. It was actually said at the time that the American economy will never resurrect. You get? it has its deficits, but let me stop there for
All
now.
right. Harold, before you come, let me just engage Joanita. She's been very quiet. Then I'll get back to you. Joanita, recommendations.
Okay, so the number one recommendation I had earlier on made looks like, still being in position to get loans from alternative countries. I mentioned the likes of China, restructuring in terms of our policies, and also I think it as well zeroes down to the fact that the average Ugandan out there is naive about the policies. So even in the events that we choose to restructure our policies to sort of fit our relations with other countries or even with IMF itself, I still feel it is pertinent for the average Ugandan to also restructure their kind of like mindset if we are to go ahead and develop and sort of like boost our economies.
And Harold, just after my sister made her submission, you wanted to say something, maybe respond. But as you respond, maybe you can wrap up your argumentation entirely from what you presented tonight in less than or in 3 minutes.
All right, thank you so much, Drake. Okay, so at the point in time, the policies of the IMF or World Bank have a possibility of controlling your economic reforms. They have a possibility of controlling your social reforms, and a possibility of controlling the way you view your leaders' political reforms. Is at a point in time you lose independence. Independence is based on 3 things: political independence, social independence, and economic independence. But nonetheless, we need to understand in this case, like my brother was saying, that negotiations are going on between the IMF, World Bank, and Uganda. Who has better bargaining power at the end of the day? Who's willing to compromise, and what do they benefit by compromising? I will tell you that at the end of the day, Uganda does not have anything like better bargaining power because they don't owe them anything, right? Because they only get 1% from their loans and they get paid later on at the end of the day. So I would want to hold a radical view that even if you're going to go for negotiations, it's not going to change much, because they don't have the bargaining power over leverage over them to changing their minds from a sort of law. We're going to have things like, oh, this law was not good, let us take it back for review. Trust me, you like it or not, unless maybe the president is overthrown by a person more radical who won't allow that to happen, it's going to happen. You will have most likely a reform, if not a bigger loan with a bigger interest, because you don't have any leverage. But then the third thing we need to understand is that for long we have been willing to sell off our dignity and our sovereignty in exchange for money that will develop us. So if we compare the prices between development and our dignity and sovereignty, we are willing to sell it off. We're willing to go through World Bank loans and get controlled as long as we're getting the money that was going to develop us. But at a point in time whereby my friend Dean said at the beginning that we keep on going in the same circle, at a point in time then we think it's not worthy anymore to lose our dignity, because we don't just lose it in one piece, we keep on losing it in big parcels. But then let's look at the other thing that we need to understand is that I think closing off wouldn't be the best solution, but I think closing off in anticipation of maybe better regional integration can work. Maybe you will tell me that EAC has failed, AU has failed, but you need to understand, why has EAC failed? Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, none of them are not within the debt burden of what? IMF, right? So at the end of the day, still IMF will make regional integrations fail. I would opt for a solution whereby we would reduce the number of loans we take from them as we prepare for regional integration. But this is something Gaddafi tried to champion, because I love him so much. United States of Africa. What happened to him? He was thrown off, right? But then the other thing we need to know from Singapore, or from the perspective of Brazil, yes, Singapore is a first world country, but Singapore was once third world country. I know I sound very mysterious and sort of the positivists call it metaphysical at the end of the day, but I think you never understand something works unless you try it. You see, like I said, stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. There's a reason as to why all African countries have had all these good economies who have encouraged them to get loans. They've done the same thing and still not gotten results out of a third world state. In fact, to this date, we've had no African country, apart from maybe South Africa, that tries, and maybe Libya, that has left third world to even second world. It is just that bad. And maybe you would say we have laws that are happening, but also Uganda has had stability for some good time, right? At least Kenya has not had any major conflicts that would disrupt it, but why don't we develop? Let me answer that question. The reason as why we don't develop, and I'm not trying to attack anyone, is that the thing that is disturbing us is on ideology, in that my brother, my sister, my brother, and even you, we think Uganda is too poor to ever do on its own. That is how much we have been indoctrinated. That is how dependent we are. What does the situation look like? The situation looks like a kid in Center High School or in a school, I'm not making an advert for them, right? In any sort of school, whose parent tells them, I'm not going to pay for his school fees anymore. A kid who's so deluded like the Ugandan mindsets will go to the streets and kill themselves, life is done. But a kid who's progressive has a mindset like that of El Muammar Gaddafi, a mindset like the old president of Singapore. That kid would say, I will survive. I will do all things, but I will survive. So at the end of the day, to wrap it all up, I think the solutions we need are solutions that are much more different from what we have been doing. Maybe we could adopt a part of what we have been doing from World Bank at the end of the day, but we do that while anticipating a lasting change. And how do we anticipate it? We don't anticipate that we're going to do it, but we get in and trigger it. We could try to trigger the United States of Africa. We could try to fix ESC, because it is never going to end. The dependence is not going to end. And that dependence has made my generation, because you see, by the time people of my generation have given up, my son is going to give up that Uganda is even third world. My son will assure me that, Father, you are wrong, Uganda is fifth world. Why? Ideology, impartation. For so long you have depended on the white man. You believe the white man is supreme. You believe what the white man says is actual law. If he brings inclusion, you're all inclusive. You would even ask yourself, why do you think Uganda joined the United Nations Organization? Did it want development, or was it told by, you know what, Britain is your mother? Why do you even have the lake still called Victoria? It is called Naruba in Uganda. Why do we have these things? I think we've been so deeply indoctrinated that there's no way out. To sum it all up, like I said at the beginning, the greatest prison is not one you can touch, smell, or see. It is a prison of the mind. The words of Morpheus in a movie known as The Matrix, telling Neo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Powerful. I'll get to you. Summarize the arguments.
We have been beating around several bushes and expressing all kinds of radicalism and all that kind of stuff.
Those bushes, we can cut them.
Yes, I now want to slash the bushes so that we can have level ground to walk on easily. Just in conclusion, one thing from time immemorial, from the time of the construction, from the time of the building of the IMF and the World Bank, is that these bodies were put out to basically lead to a certain kind of institutionalization of a global kind of framework whereby countries are divided due to their economic statuses and strats. We know where most of our African countries fall, and minority of the African countries and the minority lie. Basically, there are several ways in which we can come out of it. I want to agree with Harold that the best way we can do this is when we unite unanimously as a continent and fight the common enemy, who is going to be controlling us due to debt imperialism that happens through the constant giving of loans, yes, with very minor interest rates, but they have no impact on our economies. However, for Uganda, we need to work on our manners. We're not going to eat at the table of big guests with dirty hands. We're not going to join the rest of Africa when our fingers are still clotted with corruption, when our fingers are still stained with militarization, when our fingers are still stained with all kinds of negative financial manners that we need to do away with. When we do away with this, we are definitely headed for a first world country, as long as all the partners in the United States of Africa will work for its best interest. I would like to conclude by saying that Uganda can do on its own. However, it will need Ugandans to work for the best interest of Uganda and not for the interest of loan servicing and not for the interest of the people they look up to. If we did a Ugandan thing the Ugandan way, we could make Uganda the first world country we all want to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joanita.
Okay, so my parting shots for today would look like, I think this whole scenario brings about a situation where we go ahead and draw lessons as a country. Number one is a question of the moral kind of like lessons, we get to draw. If our leaders are really passionate and have that Pan-Africanist kind of spirit, then they should draw a lesson that it is important that we begin, prioritizing areas that will go ahead and benefit our country, even before we think of, going to other countries or going to other monetary kinds of like institutions that would be in position to sort of like help us financially. Yes, so for me, it's just basically a moral kind of like lesson, and it teaches us as citizens as well that it's high time we thought of thinking out of the box, right? And knowing and beginning to understand that there are certain policies that will eventually positively impact on us, and we just need to figure out ways of maneuvering through those policies. A vivid example being PDM. Yes, it has its own loopholes, but we can still, you know, go ahead and sort of utilize it. Dean mentions a situation of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how many youths go back to their districts to sort of like claim for the money that government allocates to youth circles and probably youth organizations. Very few of us do that. So it's high time, you know, we thought of basic ways of how to think outside of the box, utilizing the policies that favor us to develop our country, but also improve on our morals, like he says, and, you know, stop the elements of corruption before we even think of, you know, regional integrations or continental integrations. Thank you.
My sister Joanita makes very good arguments. And when we talk about corruption, you see, individuals, we as individuals, as young people, we need to first fight that fight within ourselves, because young people at this point in time are becoming very smart in that they know how to embezzle funds, and we need to solve that if at all we want a better Uganda and a better Africa. But nonetheless, Dean.
Thank you so much, first of all, for hosting me. My parting shots will be in 3 stages. First, my recommendations, and those are 2 recommendations. And then lastly, I always love leaving such platforms by looking at the topic and synthesizing the information we have shared, and also recommending a book for our viewers in case they want to understand all this geopolitical, economical war that is at play. But the first thing that would be under my recommendation as a parting shot is that Uganda, or our economic experts or our economic policy advisors, could look at, you know, emphasizing the aspect of domestic investment and entrepreneurship. And you realize what one of these things of IMF and World Bank have done is try and frustrate the domestic market, which has the strings that come with those loans is perhaps you have to bring in the Samsung, you have to bring in the LG, you have to bring in the Kia, which has put our Kia EV at a very, you know, frustrated sort of like bend, which is it can't like get the,
It can't compete.
yeah,
with
it can't
others.
compete, you understand? So I think it would be one of the things that our economic experts could look at, that is emphasizing domestic entrepreneurship and growth and everything that comes with promoting our domestic market. Secondly, and this is a very important point. In this world, it is important to note that you cannot survive alone. So what does this bring me to? The argument of Joan, the argument that she was making, it could be made even better by saying that Uganda needs to get meaningful international partners that can sort of like be around, not with strings, I mean heavy strings attached, if attached, and partners that are going to relate with Uganda as business partners, not Uganda as a poor country and them as the rich country, not them as the big, yeah, not them as the, you know, those people, the superpower, and us, the people benefiting from them. So Uganda needs to look at, you know, creating those meaningful international relations that sort of like create a fast good growing economy that can put us to a level of, you know, steady progress and, you know, grows our GDP, and it also doesn't frustrate our domestic markets and our domestic entrepreneurship and growth. So, and lastly, it is also important to note that economics has influenced the global shape for a very long time. I think since time immemorial, since the times of Mansa Musa, since the various currencies that we have had, from the gold from the Kawari shells to the gold standard to the paper money. It's been the economy influencing both politics and, you get Noam Chomsky, one of the greatest American professors, talks about how the economy actually controls the politics.
True.
And that the big players in the economy are those that are never in the media Those are the people that control whatever political things are going on in the country. So in that spirit, I would like people to understand and also appreciate that all these things can happen. The World Bank can, try and reduce on the water flowing from the tap. But when you understand and read through the book of Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics, and also his Reality Optional, you understand that, there are various stages of economic growth, and Uganda is going through one of them. The only challenge is Uganda willing to break to have the nerve, the strength to actually know that this is the decision we are supposed to make, and that whatever words are said by our dear president, it's also important to note that sometimes he's going to say these words, but he also knows that this is the right decision we have to make. Let's await what comes out of the negotiations. It's been a pleasure being hosted here today. I'm very glad, and thank you for everyone, even the people that are working on the shots and everything. I'm very grateful for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, DeanNatukunda, Harold Victor, Joanita Aliana, Laker, and Lemi Frank for taking time to join us in tonight's conversation. From me and Civic Space TV, we're very happy to having hosted all of you. It has been a very fruitful and engaging, interesting discussion, I must say. And to the camera crew, Rashid and team, thank you very much for making sure the show is up and running and on time. Thank you very much. And Center for Constitutional Governance for making this possible. Otherwise, I've been your moderator or host for tonight's conversation. Douglas Drake Onen is my name. See you again, same time, same place. Stay with us. Thank you.